Isolated incidents of community protests around the country, the IEC says that disruptions constituted a small percentage, as more than 99% of the over 22,000 voting stations were operational on a Saturday. The IEC has also reported that a number of temporary shelters erected as voting stations were destroyed. For more on this, I'm now joined by the CEO of the IEC. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm sure you must be tired, eh?
Well, it's halfway through the project. We still have tomorrow to finalize the project, but we are very elated as the Commission. Very successful first day. We hope that we can build on today's successes and have even a better success rate tomorrow.
Just listening in quickly to that interview that I just had with the captain all the way from KwaZulu-Natal, confirming that this one person who has been killed, well, 3 people been killed, the ANC is saying that this is one of their elections coordinators. Just quick reaction from the IEC side on this. Well,
any loss of life is regrettable, and to the extent that this person may be involved with election on behalf of the ANC, it's not something that sits well with us. However, we also acknowledge that there's been these types of things happening in KwaZulu-Natal to a point where there's a provincial commission of inquiry. We hope that that commission, together with police investigations, will break the bone, the back of this thing, so that we nip it in the bud, because elections really, it's about celebrating who we are as South Africans. It's about giving citizens an opportunity to express their views about the political direction of the country. Therefore, there should not be any death, even as we disagree on the political direction of the country.
And I guess that's the thing that makes it so hard for the IECs, that not only do you deal, for instance, with these community protests, but you also have to deal with political parties who face their own internal squabbles, having an impact on what the IEC is supposed to be doing.
You are right. We have to, in the environment, we've got to deal with these types of matters, because whether we like it or not, they do influence and impact our operations, which is why we are very hopeful that the Commission, which is now preparing its report, will give us some substance, some material which we can use to break the back of this malaise.
What's the danger if this is not nipped in the bud?
The danger is that it undermines the democratic process in the country, because less people will have faith in the system, less people will be willing to be participants either on behalf of parties or even as voters. So it is critical that for the enrichment of our electoral democratic processes, that this thing is nipped in the bud.
Will you be having any meetings heading into the elections with these political parties to say that, guys, we need to ensure that we have an environment that is free and fair, that will allow for free and fair elections to be taking place, notwithstanding, of course, that you have the community protests that will be taking place, and of course politicians may even play a role in quelling tensions within those communities?
Certainly, we will be rolling out a bilateral consultation process with all political parties across the country. It is important that we find one another as we intensify our preparations for 2019. So that is in the offing.
Let's speak about the community protest. This happens quite often. It's become a recurring thing that once the IEC wants to do its work, whether it's voter registration or whether it's voting day, that there will be protest action that will be taking place.
Again, quite regrettable that an opportunity for registration has been marred by all these incidents. But it's important that we have perspective. We have over 22,600 voting stations. 99% of them were functional. There are less than 100 all in all, which have been affected by community protests. And whilst regrettable, I think people feel the need to express their grievances, because there's this heightened media coverage and so on. And even in those communities, they are indicating that their grievances, their protest, it's not directed at the IEC as an institution, rather is directed at those that are in government who are supposed to be addressing the grievances.
But in that, the rights of other South Africans who would want to go and register is being hindered.
That is why it is our responsibility to ensure that even as there were delays, we do everything within our means, we do everything within our collective capacity to ensure that those stations that did not open actually open, so that every citizen who is entitled to register and vote is availed that opportunity.
And this is also important because the IEC needs to submit to the Constitutional Court that the voters' roll is in order. By June, the deadline is set.
Yes, we have to submit a final report to the Constitutional Court in June. And we hope that this opportunity that we've created will significantly reduce the 2.8 million addresses still outstanding. So we are quite hopeful. We believe that tomorrow it's even a greater opportunity for those that have not made their way to stations to do so that we are compliant and we lay a basis for a credible electoral process.
I want to touch on something that's happening on the African continent. What's happened in Kenya, we've seen it's a new development. Of course, the president of Kenya, Uhuru Kenyatta, as well as the opposition leader Raila Odinga, now smoking the peace pipe.
Yep.
But there was a threat to the independence and the credibility of the IEBC in that country. And I wonder to what extent our IEC feels that they've protected itself against attacks on its independence, as we've seen ahead of the elections back in 2009 as well.
Look, the insulation of the independence of the Electoral Commission in South Africa, it's guaranteed in the Constitution and given further substance in the Electoral Commission Act. And we think that we have a statutory framework that has built enough safeguards. Firstly, in the manner in which commissioners are appointed, where the Chief Justice is involved, where Parliament is involved, and ultimately where the President makes the appointment. That panel that is chaired by the Chief Justice, where the Public Protector participates, Chairperson of the Human Rights Commission, Chairperson of the Gender Commission, in a sense, it guarantees that the process has credibility on the one hand, but as well as the fact that it's free from political influence. That's one. But the second element is that the independence of the Commission is guaranteed in the tenure that commissioners have. It's a 7-year term. You can't just arbitrarily remove a commissioner. You've got to go to the Electoral Court, where you need to adduce incontrovertible evidence about their misconduct, if there is any misconduct. Only on that basis can a commissioner be removed. So we believe that we have a strong regulatory framework which insulates the Commission from interference.
And something quite important that Glenn Mashinini also once mentioned was the rhetoric that will be coming from political parties and political leaders as well. That once they start casting aspersions on the independence of the IEC, that then creates doubt within the public that the IEC is indeed independent as it should be, free from any political influence.
Well, the chairperson was correct that we are anticipating a robust electioneering process. But within that robust paradigm, there has to be circumspection on the side of political leaders, that they should not unjustifiably and injudiciously cast aspersions on the independence of the Commission. Because once they do so, not only do they undermine the electoral process, but they undermine the outcome of the electoral process, and by extension the legitimacy of the legislative bodies that will arise.
That's exactly what happened in Kenya. Even from the beginning of the campaigning starting, already aspersions were being cast on the IEBC in that country, and then went on even to the courts being doubted by political parties and so forth. And how do we ensure that we guard against that?
Look, there's engagement on the one hand. We will be engaging with party leaders. Express your views, express your disappointments, but be careful not to cast aspersions on the independence of the Commission, because invariably, by casting aspersions, you are undermining the legislative bodies that are going to arise. And when you do so, you are undermining governance. And once we have weakened governance in the country, anarchy may arise. So it is crucial that as we campaign, we also think of the consequences of the statements that we make.
But the IEC also, on the other hand, has to keep its house in order, make sure that the IEC officials and those at the electoral polls know exactly what it is that they're supposed to do and what's not supposed to happen.
Certainly, and from my vantage point as the Chief Electoral Officer, from the vantage point of the Commission, that's an imperative to which we remain committed, that we want to do our business in a manner that is consistent with the values of the Constitution on the one hand, but certainly in a manner that is consistent with legal prescripts.
And just in closing, when do political parties have to start registering for to be on the voters' roll come, or rather on the ballot paper come 2019?
The elections are expected to happen between May and August next year. The Commission will at some point engage with the President to start consultations about the election date. And once that is in place, then we will proclaim an election timetable, and it will define when political parties have to submit their list of candidates.
And there'll be another opportunities for voters to register, I presume.
It's a reasonable presumption, but at the moment the Commission is yet to make that decision.
That's because the target has been set. Thank you so much, Sy Mamabolo, the CEO of the IEC, speaking to us there about voter registration the first weekend. But if you missed today, tomorrow is another opportunity to go make sure your details are in order ahead of the 2019 elections. Let's go to a quick ad break.